In the quiet dark, before alarm clocks blink awake, there is a stillness. It is deeper than silence. The kind that lives inside closed windows just before morning, under blankets of sleep and breath. A sound so thin it almost hums through the bones. For those who live in water, it is the moment before a ripple, before motion breaks reflection. It is the feeling of hovering between what was and what is just about to become. This story begins in that space. The first sound is water softly, rhythmically brushing the edge of a tiled wall. Cold, chlorinated, blue like memory. It echoes softly where no one yet swims, a half trace of laps not yet taken. Floating above it all is the gentle hum of lights overhead and the distant throb of air through old vent work steady, like a breath. Here, in this silence, among ripples, yet to be born, lived a boy, and eventually a man, but not yet, not in the stillness. Michael Fred Phelps, too, did not arrive with fireworks or medals. Like most awakenings, his was slow, unflashy, born not in a stadium or a chorus of acclaim, but among the soft suburban drone of Baltimore between beige houses, stubborn lawns, and the slow-ticking routines of a middle-class American childhood. To the world, he would be a symbol of impossible strength, focus, precision, greatness, unshattered and numerical. But before all that, he was something smaller, something more uncertain. He was afraid of putting his face beneath the water, that is, where we must begin. It is easy to see an ending and believe it could never have been otherwise. To look at a world record, a podium, a gold medal, and think, of course, inevitability cloaked as destiny, that some people are born to things the rest of us aren't. But in the true stillness of a story, from that quiet before the echo, can see what came before. The misfired moments, the fears, the waiting, the blank canvas. Long before the masterpiece, greatness, it turns out, is not loud when it first appears. It is shy. It is uncertain. It tiptoes through ordinary rooms and hides inside habits. So before the pool decks and Olympic flame, before the record books bowed and statistics turned breathless, there was a bedroom in the suburbs where a boy wriggled in unspent energy and tried to sleep. There were teachers frustrated by his distractions, a mother who didn't blame them but also didn't give up, a father absent more often than not, and a boy with legs that jittered like Morse code, and hands that would not rest, whose mind ran a pace no one could seem to follow. Michael Phelps would become the most decorated Olympian in history. But first, he was a restless child, and before even that, he was just sound in water. Like all legacies, his started in the middle of somewhere. Small. His home was modest, a 2-story house on the edge of Rogers Forge, just inside the lines of Baltimore County. Red bricks and thin trees, where summer lasts long and school buses carved daily paths through neighborhoods. No one would walk past that home and guess that history slept inside it. His room was messy like most young boys. The walls bore posters of athletes he didn't yet know he'd join. Football players mostly, because that was easier to imagine than swimming for a country. Easier to picture a touchdown than a world record in butterfly. At school, there were complaints. Michael had difficulty sitting still. He tapped his pencil when he wrote. He hummed without realizing it. Hearers often mistook this for defiance, but it wasn't. It was just overflow. An inner velocity he hadn't yet learned to steer. The diagnosis came when he was in elementary. School attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. He did not know what those words meant, only how they felt. Too much, all the time. Sometimes they gave him medication, sometimes not. Always, it was something to manage. Debbie, his mother, was a middle school principal. Organized, meticulous, patient, but firm. She understood discipline and the punishment kind, but the kind fashioned from routines and choices. She knew her son wasn't bad, just bracketed in a body that moved more than it should. She watched him fight things he didn't understand, and she did not push him toward the water out of ambition, but out of necessity, safety, exhaustion, a place where movement could be let loose, without guilt. And so came the pool. If not for that part of the story, those first reluctant footsteps, the shiver of early lessons, perhaps the rest of it wouldn't have followed either. Because Michael did not love water at first. Quite the opposite, in fact. He hated it. He refused to lower his face into it. Clung to the pool's edge. Fearful of submersion, it was cold. Strange too, full of sound and silence. At once the echo of splashes, the distorted underwater voices of instructors. It was disorienting for a young boy whose inner compass was already misaligned. Yet there was something in it, something that stuck, and slowly, inch by inch, hour by hour, he stayed, kept coming back, kept dipping his head lower. The water, it turned out, calmed him. Not from the start, not in dramatic epiphany, but in the gentle way repetition calms the nervous system. How the body learns rhythm long before the mind calls it peace. He would later say that the water was the only place he felt completely in control. It was the only place that didn't ask him to sit still, only to move, and then keep moving. Morning practices followed, small ones at first, with modest goals. A few kicks across the pool, freestyle basics, learning not to panic with lungs half full, a child maturing into amphibian by slow degrees. The pool was not yet an arena. It was more like a chapel, quiet, cold, with patterns to be memorized and revered. And not long after this humbling introduction came an encounter that would shape everything else. The moment Bob Bowman entered the story. If water was Michael Phelps's cathedral, Bob became its unwavering priest, gruff, detail-obsessed, merciless in patience and demand. He saw something in Michael that others had overlooked. Not just talent, plenty of kids had good strokes, but an energy that could be channeled, a force that unrefined was chaos, but refined, it was nuclear. Under Bowman's gaze, the easy mornings ended. Work began, and in that work strange, arduous and silent a legend would begin to form. But not quickly, never quickly, because dreams do not arrive whole, they arrive as whispers, and only later do they echo. There is a kind of blue that only lives in memory, not the blue of oceans or postcards, not the crisp denim skies of summer evenings, but the dusty blue of suburban afternoons, filtered through window shades, softened by laundry machines and lawn sprinklers. Blue that seeps in around the edges of an ordinary life and settles into its corners. The blue of waiting, of things not yet formed. That was the color of Michael's childhood, Rogers Forge, Maryland. A tangle of narrow streets and tight fence lines, where basketball hoops lean tired on driveways and sidewalks crack beneath maple roots. A place where children grow up slowly, where nothing much changes year to year. The kind of stillness that feels infinite when you're 10. It was here, inside a red brick house with white trim and a front porch in need of paint, that Michael Phelps began his early choreography with restlessness. He was the youngest of 3. Lanky and pale, with ears that stuck out and legs that didn't seem to stop moving. His sisters, Whitney and Hillary, blazed ahead of him in life, both swimmers already. Both older, both grounded in ways that eluded him. Michael was different. There was a storm beneath his skin. The diagnosis would come early 3rd grade, maybe, or sooner. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Letters made to sound clinical. Designed to explain why he couldn't sit still in a chair or finish a worksheet or follow directions the way other kids seemed to. It was a label that teachers marked in reports and whispered during parent conferences to Michael. It just felt like being pulled in 100 directions at once. Each classroom was a battlefield. Desks, bright lights, the low hum of fluorescent bulbs, it all buzzed around his ears like static. He doodled when he should have written, hummed when he should have listened, moved when they asked him to be still. It wasn't defiance. It was overflow energy with no off switch. He learned what the other kids thought of him too. That he was weird, spacey, a troublemaker. And even if he didn't always understand the teasing, he understood the loneliness of it. But his mother did not give up on him. Deborah Sue Phelps, Debbie, to most, was fierce with her love. A school principal by trade, she understood the mechanics of systems, how they could help children and how they could fail them. She fought for Michael not by denying his challenges, but by investing in scaffolds strong enough to hold him where others saw a child who couldn't sit still. She saw one who hadn't yet found a place where motion was accepted or even celebrated. Swimming didn't come to Michael because of a dream. It came because of need. He had to learn the life skill, a safety precaution, one of those after-school programs that suburban kids get shuffled into. It was easier to manage a boy at the pool than to battle him at home, where furniture trembled at his pace. Michael did not take to the water easily. The first memory is vivid. A too-cold pool, neon lane ropes slack in the middle, whistles echoing off tiled walls. He clung to the side, bony fingers curled around the ceramic ledge, unwilling to dip below the surface. He cried, screamed maybe, refused outright. The water seemed an alien thing, too much sound, too much space, all at once. At that point, no one could have guessed the irony. The same boy who resisted submersion would one day live beneath that surface longer and more gracefully than any human before him. But back then, the pool was not soothing. It was terrifying. Even the ceiling above it, with its long white boards and industrial lights, felt like it hovered too far away. The echoing of shouts and splashes created a pressure in his chest. And when he did finally dip his head under, the roar of the world warped, become blurry and swollen and strange. Still, he came back. Not quickly, not confidently, but again and again. It didn't happen all at once, but something began to shift. Maybe it was that the water didn't demand him to be still. Maybe it was the quiet of being underwater, the way the noise of the world dulled like cotton in the ears. Maybe it was the burn in his arms, the sore in his legs, as his body learned to move with purpose. Somewhere in those early lessons, the current caught part of him and carried it forward. His instructors noticed it first, a kind of pull. Michael wasn't the most disciplined, wasn't the fastest in drills, but there was something in the way he cut across a lane. The natural cadence, the kick that hung on just a beat longer. It was raw and messy, but it was unmistakable, and he began to like it. The feeling of propulsion, of glide. He liked the way the pool marked progress tangibly there and back, time on a stopwatch, breath in exact intervals. It gave him a rhythm, The world above the water felt scattered, but down here it made sense. By the age of 7, he was already more comfortable in water than on dry ground. His sisters noticed first. Whitney, 4 years older, had already competed seriously. She'd reached the Olympic trials in the butterfly and understood the brutal rhythms of the swimmer's day. Early mornings, sacrifice, silence. Hillary, too, was no stranger to chlorine burns and split-second finishes. So when they saw their little brother glide through the water without trying, they exchanged glances. Something was happening. Something not ordinary. Debbie, for all her support, didn't dream of gold medals when she watched Michael swim laps in the neighborhood pool. Not at first. She dreamed of peace, of ease, of happiness. And as the laps added up, so did the signs that something in his body was answering the water's invitation. It wasn't just that he swam well, it was that he swam differently and slowly. The home in Rogers Forge began to pivot around this new rhythm. Towels and gear bags, early dinners and commuting to practices. The grind had begun, not yet Olympic, not yet epic, but present. Steady. It was around this time that Debbie heard about a coach at the North Baltimore Aquatic Club who was known for spotting talent early. A coach who was reputedly tough, demanding, not someone to coddle a young swimmer, but someone who could shape potential into performance. His name was Bob Bowman, and the first meeting between them was quiet. There was no epiphany when they shook hands, no speech or cinematic promise that greatness lay ahead. Just a nod, a clipboard, a coach watching a boy swim a few lengths with the arms and legs of someone growing faster than they could control. But Bob saw what others had antidote. He saw the angles, the reach, the astonishing mechanics of a body that seemed custom-built for water, and, perhaps more importantly, he saw the mind, chaotic, eager, untamed, but full of fire. Bob would later describe that first impression not with hyperbole, but with precision. He saw a swimmer who needed a system, a mind sharp and wild, hunting structure, even when it rejected it, and a boy whose eyes, beneath the awkwardness, held a determined edge. The beginnings of their partnership were not marked by affection, but by distance. Bob did not praise easily. Michael did not embrace criticism gently, but something formed between them, a current, unspoken, like gravity beneath the surface. And as Michael entered his preteens, that partnership would begin to fuse. Schedules tightened. Weekends vanished. Practices doubled. Sleep surrendered. Every day he woke early, often in darkness, ate quietly, drove in silence. The world outside the car still sleeping as he plunged into the cold each morning. No one outside those tiled walls could yet see what was taking shape. But a boy was swimming toward his future, stroke by stroke, impulse by impulse, but without ceremony, just motion, just water, and in that repetition, his mind finally began to rest. There are few places lonelier than a pool at dawn, still dark outside, still quiet. The water lies untouched, flat as a mirror, waiting. There's a hum from the overhead lights that fill the aquatic center with a pale, unwavering brightness. It filters through large plate glass windows rimmed with night frost. The bleachers are empty, the hallways silent. Only the drip and echo of distant droplets mark time. This is where Michael Phelps began to be sculpted, not in competition, but in solitude each morning, before most cars stirred and coffee was brewed. A young boy was awake, pulling on a damp suit, dragging his feet across cold tile, yawning through goggle marks and chlorine burns. No applause, no medals. Just discipline, applied at an age where many are still learning how to tie shoes the right way. Bob Bowman was already there, clipboard in hand, stopwatch dangling like a pendant of promise and punishment. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. He set the tone with a look. Bowman was not warm, not concerned with pleasantries or praise, but he noticed everything. Every lag in stroke, every kick imperfect in timing. His eye was surgical, and under that gaze, Michael began to change. At first, he hated it, the repetition, the rigor without reward. But inside the disciplining of movement, something else began to settle. Form, structure, purpose. By the age of 10, Michael had already begun breaking national age group records, not just occasionally, routinely. That strange body of his, with its long wingspan, hypermobile joints, and uncanny buoyancy, wasn't just different, it was ideal. His arms stretched longer than his height suggested. His ankles flexed like fins. He could bend and twist in ways that made other swimmers stare. At first, it looked almost awkward until he moved. Then it looked inevitable. But physical gifts can only go so far. What Bowman saw beneath the metrics, beyond the stroke mechanics and breath timing, was raw compulsion. A desire to go faster, longer, deeper, not driven by victory. Not yet, just the need. The need to move until things made sense. Michael was still a boy, gangly, freckled, easily frustrated. He could throw fits, sulk, snap. His mind rebelled quickly when pushed, but Bowman didn't bend. He drew boundaries, not bridges, and slowly, those boundaries became the shape of something beautiful. It was a relationship built not on friendship, but something more durable: expectation. Trust, even if unspoken, a kind of emotional apprenticeship. Michael, at some level, craved the clarity of those lines. The workouts were hard, the pool water always cold at the start, but within the laps and splits and endless drills, something settled in his mind. He didn't need the pool to be fun, he needed it to be honest. That honesty showed up in early competitions. Michael glided through local meets with strange elegance. He stood taller on starting blocks, narrow hips cutting lean shadows beside shorter, older swimmers. By the time he entered the national scene as a teenager, heads had begun to turn. He was 15 when he qualified for the US Olympic trials in the year 2000. The pool had long shifted from playground to proving ground. Bob, ever observant, tracked his metrics. Times improved with metronomic regularity. Michael's butterfly was especially otherworldly: long, sweeping strokes interlaced with an unmatched dolphin kick. Something about the way he rose and fell in the water, how he carved air before re-entry felt like it didn't belong on Earth. Before the trials in 2000, few outside Baltimore knew his name. Afterward, they would. The event loomed larger than anything he'd entered before. Names he read about in magazines now stood beside him in the locker room. Bodies sculpted from Olympic pedigree, voices calm with experience, breath relaxed where his quickened. He was 15, skinny, shivering in a team issue jacket. The arena buzzed. Cameras hovered. For the first time, the stakes were national. The lights brighter, the minutes tighter. Michael swam like someone calling their shot. He qualified for the Olympic team, the youngest male swimmer to do so in nearly 70 years. The scope of that didn't fully land for him then. How could it? He was still in high school, still battling acne and algebra, still unsure how to answer when classmates asked what he was doing this summer, and he replied, going to Sydney. At the 2000 Olympics in Australia, Michael did not win a medal, but that was never the point. He finaled in the 200-meter butterfly, 5th place, not gold, but fire. He stood behind the starting blocks as a teenager, staring across lanes at full-grown adults, and something inside him didn't shrink, it lit up. The atmosphere consumed many, but for him it fed something old and urgent to need, sharper than fear, stronger than awe. He belonged, even without proof, even without podium, back at home. Bowman witnessed the transformation. The boy who returned from Sydney had a new edge, less scattered, more precise, sharper in listening, harder in effort. Michael still joked between sets, still bounced like electricity when bored. But something internal had shifted. The dream was no longer hypothetical, it was just unfinished. That autumn, workouts intensified again. The team at North Baltimore knew there was something unusual happening in Lane 4. The way Michael sliced through water, how his splits became more consistent, his kick more fierce. He trained even during school breaks, holidays, weekends. He missed dances, parties, even birthdays. If the practice schedule said so, he did the work because he didn't know how not to. Once, a reporter asked him what it felt like to swim as he did. He paused, shrugged, gave a quiet answer. It's the only place where everything goes quiet. That became the seed of everything else. In the turmoil of youth, of pressure, sprinting thought, and fast emotion, he'd found stillness in water. It did not praise him, did not excuse him. It simply gave back exactly what he gave it, no less, no more. This was what Bowman had hoped for, not just form, but fire, not just routine, but rhythm. By the time Michael turned 16, whispers had grown, of gold, eventually, of challengers, falling behind. The world didn't yet know at how many records would vanish, how many lengths he would erase the difference between man and water, but nearby. A coach adjusted stroke plans, a mother bought new calendars, and a restless child tied his goggles tighter, leaned over the edge of the pool, and dove not to win. Not yet, but to become. There is jet lag that sits behind the eyes, and then there is Olympic exhaustion, something deeper, quieter, the kind that buries itself in the muscle and mind. In Athens, in the heavy August heat of 2004, Michael Phelps stood beneath the rings, 19 years old, arms longer than his jacket, nerves tucked behind tinted goggles. Outside, the city buzzed with mythology and sea scent. Inside the Olympic Village, corridors were lined with sneakers, meals measured in protein and carbohydrates, soft murmurs of languages from every edge of the earth. Faces bore the subtle tension of years compacted into days, dreams shaved down to hundredths of a second. Michael moved through it all like someone welded into a schedule. Wake, eat, swim, nap, warm up, race, repeat. His headphones rarely left his ears. Even alone, music wound around him like armor. It wasn't that he wanted to block the world out, more that the tempo calmed the collisions happening inside his own head. This was the Olympics, and not just any Olympics. It was the one where pressure arrived fully grown. He was entered in 8 events, an echo of something impossible. Mark Spitz's 7 golds from Munich. Everyone whispered it. Some said it loud. His coach, Bob Bowman, knew better than to repeat the name aloud more often than necessary. But it lingered in every press conference, every question. Did he feel the weight of it? Maybe, But Michael had long learned to translate pressure into propulsion. He did not arrive in Athens to chase Spitz. He arrived to chase himself. The first race carried the most static. The 400-meter individual medley, a brutal, lonely stretch of motion, where swimmers shift styles like actors changing masks. By the time he hit the freestyle leg, only shadows trailed behind him. Gold world record. No celebration, just breath. Goggles off, a nod. The games had begun. Each day folded into the next like a ritual. Between heats and finals, he returned to a quiet dorm room that smelled of menthol and wet towels. Occasionally, a smile. Rarely, rest. He swam in the mornings, when the water felt glass-like and narrow. Again at night, when the noise in the stands could swallow a thought whole. He won gold again in the 100-meter butterfly, then again in the 200-meter freestyle. Gold. After gold, some easy to the eye, others fought down to the fingertip. But not all of them arrived that way. In the 4x100-meter freestyle relay, the US finished third. Bronze, the dream of a perfect run, flickered. But perfection had never been the true aim. Phelps gave up his spot in another relay one he had been qualified to swim. He offered it to Ian Crocker, a teammate who had stumbled in an earlier race. Michael didn't announce it, didn't post about it. He just stepped aside. The team won, and Crocker got his gold. Later, when asked about it, Michael said simply, "It didn't feel right to swim it." There are decisions in sports that don't count toward a medal tally, but they matter more in the 200-meter butterfly. Michael rewrote the standard. No one else close. He didn't thrash. He didn't force. He floated forward like an element in its ideal form. His arms arched, his feet swept, the rhythm unbroken, as if every lap had been rehearsed in a dream. By the halfway point of the games, his name was dripping through headlines, not just as a phenom, but as a phenomenon. The Baltimore Bullet, they started calling him the next great Olympian. But to Michael, all of it stayed filed away. He wasn't counting medals, he was counting races in the water. He placed one stroke after the next, the same discipline trained over years of silent mornings. If there was awe, it waited until the tunnel afterward, where swimsuits sloughed off like armor, where breath returned sharp and real. Inside all of this gold, there was still strain. Phelps was surviving on accumulated stillness, hours spent silent, on buses or sunk into foam rollers. When asked what he thought about prior to racing, he said, "Just the first 15 meters. That was all swimmers know. If you think about the end too early, you burn too fast." So he stayed inside one moment at a time, one breath, one turn. In total, he left Athens with 6 gold medals, 2 bronze, to the world. It was monumental. To Michael, it was unfulfilled. This wasn't the story he'd planned for himself. There were .01 regrets, moments, where a sloppy turn or spent breath could shift fate by a blink. But that was the nature of the game. He smiled for the camera, stood for the anthem, waved to the crowd. Then he was back in the water, sharpening the corners, re-watching tape, picking apart details. Even in his youth, he understood that swimming was not about victory, was about proximity to perfect form. And form could always be faster. His mother watched from the stands with mist in her eyes, not only because her son had won, but because he had grown posture, in patience, in poise. What the world saw was a swimmer who couldn't be stopped. What she saw was a boy who had once clung to the pool's edge, now commanding it. In the weeks that followed, the Interviews kept coming. Reporters asked where he could go from here. Phelps said, "I'm just getting started." And in a sense, he was. Because success, too, asks something of you. So does expectation. And no matter how fast he swam, something always seemed to chase him. As the Athens lights dimmed and the flags were folded, Michael packed his goggles, boarded the return flight, and stared at the window as miles peeled away behind him. He had won more than any American swimmer in a single games since Spitz. But he didn't feel done. He felt ... hungry, quietly. He unwrapped a protein bar, leaned his head back and let the rhythm of flight take him home. There are places in the world that don't quite feel real. Beijing, in the summer of 2008, became one of them. The Olympic Village sat like an oasis carved from the future glass towers, meticulously pruned hedges, and roads that gleamed with a kind of newness only seen in dreams or scale models. Athletes filtered through in uniforms of dozens of nations, the air thick with humidity and ambition. For Michael Phelps, it was another room, another pool, another stage, yet something about this one shimmered, like the outline of possibility had been drawn a little closer, as if the water itself was waiting. Others might have hesitated beneath that weight, but he didn't seem to, because for 4 years he had prepared for this. Every single day. That wasn't a phrase. It was literal. From the moment Athens faded into the rear view, Michael had stepped into a regimen that was closer to religion than training. He swam every day, 365 days a year, birthdays, holidays, Christmas morning. He once said it plainly, "If I miss one day, I feel it." Bob Bowman crafted the schedule with care and severity, 5 to 6 hours a day in the water, often to sessions, sometimes more, plus dryland workouts, weights, core training. Everything moved around one nucleus. The water. The idea was simple. Don't let the body forget, not even for a moment. If his competitors took Sundays off, that was one extra opportunity to be better than them. It wasn't just about training harder. It was about training longer, sharpening the mind to live within fatigue, making pain negotiate, reprogramming the body so that everything not only survived repetition, but sought it. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to become the standard no one else could reach. When they arrived in Beijing, Michael moved through the days with quiet urgency. He wasn't chasing ghosts anymore, not even Spitz. He was chasing what had not yet happened, the imagined, the uncreated. 8 gold medals in 1 Olympic Games. It had never been done before, not in swimming, not like this. The schedule was grueling, 8 events, each with heats, potential semifinals, and finals. Dozens of swims, each with exacting strategy, each requiring different muscles, different breathing patterns, different mental approaches. Some were sprints, others a test of sustained grit. There was no room for errors, no time for a lapse. But Michael carried the load like stone in water somehow, weightless where others would sink. The first event, for 100-meter individual medley, a monster of a race. 4 strokes, 4 laps, and the 4th time in a row he swam it better than anyone in history. Gold world record. He slipped into the ready room after unsmiling, focused, already counting rest minutes before the next race. There was no celebrating, only calibrating. The racers began to pulse like a drumbeat dot in the 200-meter freestyle. He glided through like water's chosen one, his arms slicing forward as if pulled by unseen strings. Gold. Then came the 200-meter butterfly, the race that should have been easy, controlled, measured, but his goggles filled with water in the first lap completely. He went blind. The world dropped into silence. No visual cues, no idea how close lanes were. Just rhythm. He counted strokes instead. He knew it took him 13 strokes to reach the wall on the final lap. So he swam by feel, by memory, by muscle ballet and blind trust. Touched the wall, gold, world record. Later, he would shrug it off. I've done the math 1,000 times. But that race began to color the myth. A swimmer who could win even when sinking into darkness. The world leaned closer. Camera crews multiplied. Broadcasters whispered louder. Was it really possible? Was he really going to win all 8? Phelps remained on schedule, not just with races, but meals, naps, lunches stacked with carbs, ice baths, 15-minute rest windows, bordered by protein shakes and unread text messages. He was not participating in the Olympics. He was tunneling through them. Then came the relay, 4x100-meter freestyle. It was not supposed to be one. The French were favored, and in truth, for all but the final 15 meters of that race, the US was losing. Jason Lasecta, oldest member of the team, anchored and delivered a final split so unreal, so flared with superhuman speed. It flipped the race in the closing second. The Americans won. Michael screamed louder than he ever had, arms spread, mouth open in unbridled joy. Gold again this time. He did not contain the celebration. He let it spill. His teammates surrounded him, and for a second, he was not the singular machine of focus. He was a man relieved, awed. So much could have gone wrong, but it hadn't by this point. He had 5 gold medals, each race moving toward climax, but perhaps the most unforgettable was the 7th, the 100-meter butterfly. Not his best event. He wasn't the fastest Serbian swimmer Milorad Vevic was. They dove. Vevic led the entire race, but as the wall approached, Phelps did something that few notice unless they understand the architecture of finishing. He did not glide, he stroked again. One last, desperate stroke. Even as Vevic reached with outstretched arms, the scoreboard blinked. Phelps, 50.58, Vevic, 50.59, 100th of a second. Gold. They say it could go either way, Michael said after. But I did what I had to do. He had tied Spitz at 7. One more race to go. The 4 100-meter medley relay, his final swim of the games by now. The arena throated with tension, the planet almost holding a collective breath. He swam the butterfly leg. Perfectly. The team won, gold. #8. His teammates lifted him silently, and then, thunder. Applause that didn't feel like cheering, it sounded like release. History had not just been rewritten, it had been redrawn. Michael Phelps stood on the edge of the block, arms crossed, and for the first time during those games, he smiled like someone exhaling after years, not because it was over, but because all of it, every second, every stroke had mattered, every alarm in the dark, every Sunday practice, every pain-flared morning, they shaped something that even time stood still to witness. And then came the silence, again, a deeper quiet than before, the kind that ripples across both time and water, where the swim ends and the echo begins. The water was quieter now, no lane lines being moved, no claps or whistles, No press room murmurs. The suit dried where it hung, medals tucked into drawers. Statisticians etched numbers onto pages he didn't care to read. Michael Phelps was home, or at least somewhere near it, not in the emotional sense, not in fullness, but in geography. In the sleepless back and forth of interviews and parades, he had returned to the still places, suburban quiet, close roads, the same walls he'd left behind before becoming legend. And yet, something was missing. The fire was there, lingering in photographs, in highlight reels played to rising music, but inside him, a strange drift had started. Not a crash, not drama, just a tilt. Like a swimmer leaning slightly off course in a dark pool, and no coach round to yell a correction. Fame had done its part with glittering efficiency. Magazine spreads, talk shows, the kind of acclaim that folds itself into daily life until it can no longer hold weight. He appeared in commercials, received awards, met presidents, always with the practiced smile, the one that said, "Yes, this is amazing," even when a WASN single quotes turned when he entered a room. But no one could follow him where he truly went, because what the world didn't see, the world that had named him perfect and peerless, was what happened when the water stopped. He'd built a life on motion. Without it, everything unraveled. Too quietly to notice all at once. The structure that had supported him for 15 years, those silent mornings, the ritual and rigor was gone. The pressure had broken, but with its release came a kind of freefall, one without gravity or gold. He stayed out late, too late, drank more than he ever did while training, numbed instead of listened. There were parties, some light-hearted, others darker at the edges, but always movement for the sake of avoiding stillness. The pool had ordered his world. Without it, days slipped upward and sideways. Then, in 2009, a photo surfaced. Michael bent over a glass pipe, a bong. The picture rippled across the media like oil on water, distorted and sticky, impossible to contain. Headlines burned fast, so did opinions. He issued an apology. He lost sponsors for a cold few weeks. The golden glow around him faltered. Not broken entirely, he was still who he was. But the myth had thinned, and underneath, the boy had reappeared, the one who never quite knew what to do with silence. He didn't fight the fallout with words. He didn't deny. He mostly disappeared. There were attempts to continue, practices resumed, international meets entered, but the intensity was no longer rooted. Training wasn't the same. The need was dimmer. His performances slid, fractions at first, then more. He still swam faster than almost any human alive, but not quite the same, not with the same hunger, and in between those moments, something darker deepened, a quiet kind of sadness, not the crying type, the quiet type, the one that grows legs in the hours after midnight, that waits for you when the TV's sound fades and the ceiling won't blink back. He didn't talk about it then, not publicly, but the thoughts were there, not just about swimming, about existing. He wondered sometimes what it meant to have done something so magnificent and not know what to be afterward. Would he ever feel again what he'd felt mid-res, balanced between purpose and pain, with nothing else in the world that made more sense? He began to lock himself away, curtains drawn, phone ignored. Food arrived, left untouched. Depression is not always explosive. Sometimes it's a slow leak in the night. Bob Bowman saw it. His mother felt it. Friends hinted. But Michael was not the type to confess easily. He wore invincibility with such polish that admitting it as disguise felt like betrayal. It wasn't until years later that the dam broke. In 2012, he returned for London, not because he wanted to chase, but because he didn't know how to truly stop. He entered, again shoulders broader now, eyes heavier, cadence more deliberate. The spark was not the same, but pieces of it remained. He swam 6 events, walked away with 4 golds, 2 silvers, 2. Nearly any other human being, the achievement would be an uncontestable peak to Michael. It was a conclusion. He announced his retirement, stood poolside in London, smiled, waved, turned back toward dry land, and left the sport he had defined. The response was warm, full of tribute and awards, timelines and articles. But behind the curtain, the fall began in earnest, truly, this time, without a next race to train. For, no anchoring rituals, Michael drifted farther. Parties resumed, alcohol, heavy in intention, not for fun, for closure's absence. In 2014, pulled over for drunk driving, caught breathalyzing over twice the legal limit, arrested, the mugshot said the rest. This time there wasn't hiding, not from the law, not from himself. He entered rehab, checked into the Meadows, a treatment center in Arizona, place smelling faintly of desert shrubs and reflection, not to reclaim medals, to survive. It was there, in the stripped-down hours of recovery, that he finally spoke aloud the thoughts that had lived behind all the winning, depression, anxiety, the echo of purpose, too large to carry. He talked about the dark tunnel he had been walking, how he wrote a note, once, not for poetry, but a goodbye. He never sent it, but he'd written it. And suddenly, the stories so many thought they knew a marvel in goggles and headlines became something vastly more human. A boy, a man, wrestling not with time in water, but with time alone. And then, slowly, something began to mend, not magically, not neatly, but honestly, in the quiet recovery rooms, in journals, in sobering daylight. He began to see forward again, not to a podium, to a life. He emerged from the Meadows with less weight on his shoulders and more lines in his voice. This was not redemption, it was survival. And for the first time, he let people see it. He didn't know, at first, that he would return in the months after treatment. The days moved more slowly, deliberately, as if they had to be relearned. Michael Phelps didn't wake to alarm clocks anymore. There were no early swims, no heat, charts pinned to locker doors, no competitive rituals coiling through the morning. He woke with silence in his chest and unfamiliar clarity. Some days were still difficult. Memories didn't vanish with treatment, but he'd started to understand the arc of his own inner weather, the low pressure, the rising waves, and in the steadiness of honest talk and recovery routines, he found a kind of pause. Not peace, exactly, but the traction needed to move forward. And forward, it turned out, meant finding new reason, not just new medals. In the stillness of those 2014 afternoons, when the sun arced over Arizona and the quiet filled his rooms, he began to remember something. Not the competition, not the glint of gold, but the water itself, how it had always calmed him, how it once held him when nothing else seemed to. He would hear laps echoing in memory, sent the distant bite of chlorine. His body remembered even if his mind wasn't asking yet. He began swimming again, not for the podium, for the pulse of it, the rhythm, one stroke, then another. nothing else. Back in Baltimore, Bob Bowman had waited not with pressure or fanfare, but a kind of tempered hope. If Michael would return, it would have to be on different terms. There could be no reclaiming what existed before. That version of swimming, driven by demons, inner tempests, and sharp perfectionism, was over. But maybe they could find something in its place. So together, without announcement, they returned to the pool. The laps were smaller at first, not timed, just felt. And gradually, a structure rose from those waters, gentler in some ways, but clear. He was different now. Older, a father. In love. Nicole Johnson had come into his life quietly and meaningfully. She met him not as the swimming machine, the icon, but as a man trying to breathe beneath a massive, invisible weight. They'd dated before, separated, but now, with more honesty, they returned to each other. In 2016, their son Boomer was born, and something in Michael shifted again. Fatherhood, the way a small hand wrapped around his thumb could silence entire storms. The sleeplessness, real and bleary, softened the edges of old ambition. He no longer wanted to chase the past. He wanted to show his son who he was becoming. And so, with clearer intention, he made the quiet decision. He would go to Rio not for legacy, for closure. Training resumed, focused and finite. No longer were the workouts unending punishments of youth. Now they were crafted with thought, conservation, age. His body wasn't quite the machine it once was. Recovery took longer, flexibility narrower. But in the water, he still moved like something remembered. Rio 2016 approached, with a haze of familiar anticipation. But this time, the burden sat differently on his shoulders. He wasn't chasing immortality, he was chasing presence. When he arrived in Brazil, the world watched still, of course, they did. He was 31, competing in his 5th Olympics. The most decorated Olympian in history was returning for one final swim. Critics debated whether he would last, whether the fire could return, if time hadn't carved away the fractions he'd once ruled by. But something had changed. He no longer needed to swim to prove something. He swam to release something. The Olympic Village buzzed with youth, new talent, fresh names, loud music. But Michael was a figure of gravity, now quieter, more observant. Some called him the captain. He mentored younger swimmers, told stories, reminded them of the discipline in silence, the sacredness of the water. Boomer came to the events, too young to understand, but there he was cheering, goggled, and wrapped in a little flag, wide-eyed from the stands. And when Michael looked up before each race, that's who he found, not expectation, love. One of the most symbolic races came early against Chad Leclos, the brash South African who had edged Michael out in 2012. Their rivalry had been painted with tension. Leclos had taunted. Gamesmanship lit up the headlines. They met again in the 200-meter butterfly. It was close, but not undecided. Michael swam, clean, powerful, free. He touched first, and as the crowd erupted and cameras zoomed, what flashed across his face wasn't triumph but softness, a personalized peace, not vengeance. Afterward, when asked about the win, he didn't gloat. He spoke gently. I knew what I wanted to do, and I did it. He would swim 5 events in Rio. He won 5 medals, 4 gold, 1 silver, and there, on the final relay, the last event of his career, he positioned himself behind the blocks with calm familiarity. He breathed deep, stretched those long arms one final time, and dove. The strokes weren't perfect, but they were true. Stronger than age, wiser than youth. When he touched the wall for the last time and slipped from the pool, he did not skip or slap the water. He simply nodded to himself, to time. Michael Phelps finished his career with 28 Olympic medals, 23 of them gold. No human had done that before. No one likely ever will again. But the most profound medal he earned in Rio couldn't be fastened to a ribbon. It was stillness, the equilibrium of knowing he no longer needed to swim away from anything. When the games ended, he returned to his son, held him, kissed Nicole on the cheek, and stepped into a new kind of water, a life without lanes, a life unmeasured, for the first time in decades. There would be no alarms before dawn, no countdowns, only mornings and breath. It's strange what people remember. Some recall the medals, the numbers, 28 total, stacked in rows, 23 of them gold. Some write articles about those figures, compare them to countries, to centuries, to impossibilities laid bare. But others remember something quieter. The way a swimmer looked just before a race, his arms slapping in rhythm across his back, the tense sigh before taking his mark, the small moment after a finish when he simply stared at the scoreboard as if confirming that yes, again, he'd done it. And beyond those, a few remember something even smaller. A boy Dot in a neighborhood outside Baltimore, tugging at his swim cap, gripping the wall like a lifeline, uncertain of what it meant to be submerged. It takes years, whole lifetimes, to learn that greatness often begins in fear, and sometimes mastery grows slowly from what we fear most. Michael Phelps became the most decorated Olympian in recorded history, but just as remarkably, he became something else afterward. Someone who let people in, who traded in solitude for fatherhood, silence for advocacy, who stopped trying to outrun his mind and instead sat with it. It's easy to craft legends in hindsight, clean, sculpted, and unwavering, but real stories resist polish. They slide out at the edges. And Michael's story is not clean. It crests and drops. It disappears for a time. It aches. It returns. He has said often since leaving the pool that he still swims. Not competitively, just sometimes alone. Backstroke, long laps, no clocks. He says it still feels like home, the water. Still provides something that no other room can. A place where everything is quiet and everything is earned. He also speaks, not of victory, not of world records, but of the mind, depression, anxiety, those currents that live beneath the surface, invisible but powerful enough to pull under. Michael has become an advocate for mental health, willing to expose his scars so others might understand their own. He's said, "It's okay to not be okay." A phrase simple in rhythm, but radical in freedom, especially when spoken by someone who conquered the world stage with unmatched ease. He knows now there is no finish line for peace, only waves. Some days, he walks along the water's edge, ocean, waves, this time, not chlorine blue lanes, with his children, with Nicole. Laughs echoing sharper than any cheers from stadiums long faded. He coaches, mentors, and tells his story not for applause, but connection. Because if gold medals teach anything, it's that they don't silence the noise inside, but a spoken truth sometimes can. And so the boy who once feared the water didn't just learn to swim, he learned to return. learned to reach back and pull others forward. The strokes he takes now are different in classrooms, in treatment centers, across podcasts, dinner tables, bedtime stories. His legacy isn't just times etched into walls. It's in telling a room full of teenagers that asking for help isn't weakness. It's courage. It's laying down invincibility to model something more honest. It's being a father, a husband, a friend, still unlearning, still unfolding. The water will always be part of Michael's story, but now, so is everything beyond it. And every once in a while, when the morning is just right, and fog still curves over the surface of the water, he slips back in, arms cutting forward, effortlessly, as if remembering something only his body knows. It's not a race anymore, just movement, just breath, and then dash stillness, like that first moment. Long ago, before alarm clocks, before cameras, before scoreboards, blinked in red dot, the water waits. The ripples settle, and then the world is quiet again.